Mike and Tom are registered with Steward Partners Global Advisors. Common Sense Finance with Mike Wiginton and Tom Farrell of HL Wiginton Capital Management, an independent investment and financial planning firm in downtown Jasper. Mike is a chartered financial analyst charter holder, and Tom is a certified financial planner professional. They are here to discuss and give their thoughts on current financial and economic matters. Now, with Common Sense Finance, here are Mike and Tom.
Welcome back to another edition of Common Sense Finance. I'm Tom Farrell, and this is Mike Wiginton. You know, we did correction in residential housing not too long ago.
Is there a correction in residential housing coming? Yeah, part one. That was part one.
This is part two. So you can, I know you have some more information to add to the first one, so I'll let you.
Well, I appreciate that introduction.
Yeah.
It's very nice of you.
Yeah.
I would say, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the majority of the people that take the time to watch our podcast either A, own a home, or
probably
they're really interested in acquiring one.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be some people
or they lived in a home somewhere.
Yes, and were kicked out
at some point in time. Or
and they're trying to get back in.
Have seen a house.
And so this is a conversation that whether you're on the front end of that time frame, in the years where you're acquiring your first home or thinking about upsizing, or you're on the back side and aging and maybe you're considered downsizing. This is I think information that anybody in those areas would want to, in those groups would want to consume. Okay, so in part one, here's what we talked about. The talking points or the concerns really centered around some ideas brought up with some research that we pay for. And it had to do with, hey, look, well over half of the people in the United States that own a home, like 56% of homes in the country, are owned by people over the age of 60. And how a lot of the people over the age of 60 are already retired or on fixed income. And hey, what has gone on with the cost of home ownership? And over the last 3 years, property taxes have ballooned. Home insurance has gone through the roof, no pun intended, okay? And to add to that, you have all these other costs of ownership that are being put off on homeowners, like there's a whole thing, and we're going to give you, we'll have Oliver Stone flash the sources for this up so you can look into this yourself, that now, a lot of you probably already know this, that insurers are trying to get out of this whole roof coverage, that they're going to go from a full replacement cost to some sort of depreciated cost because it's wiping them out. Yep. And the people that just in that home insurance category have not made money in several years, all right? And so even though roofs are long-term maintenance items, that's a big ticket item, mm-hmm. You know? So more and more, I mean, the cost of ownership, and anybody that's been doing anything since 2020, after COVID, knows it's, from a cost perspective, it's a different world. It's not just about the grocery store with eggs and milk, it's everything. So you've got these folks on fixed income, cost of ownership, hey, might that add a new source of supply onto the market? And that's kind of what that part one centered around. I want to give you another thought today that has to do with interest rates and interest rate cycles. We talked about before. We showed a 200-year history of interest rates and how interest rates move in 30 to 40-year cycles. February of 2022, I've got a chart, and actually this is a chart, a Freddie Mac 30-year mortgage rate. We're going to get Dr. Combs to flash this up on the screen for us, okay? And I go back to 1980 on this chart and bring it up through November of this year, November of 2024. But February 22 marked 41 years that we had successively lower rates, okay? So for the people at home, this way. Lower and lower rates. So you go through like a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and it would pay you, you'd get a raise. If you're staying in your house, you'd get a raise by refinancing. Right. People were refinancing at lower and lower rates. Mm-hmm. And your home payment was lower. My suggestion to you is that that regime is over, that you are in a higher, for longer, and potentially an elevated, an increasing interest rate environment. Well, and I'll define this because this is Mike Wiginton saying this, and based on my opinion and my work history and education, that nobody knows what to make of that. In modern people, I mean, because if you're over 60 years old, you've been in a house a lot, you remember 1980. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're 65 or 70 years old, you remember interest rates in 1980. But for the masses of folks out there, I say the modern era, like when Freddie Mac and people started borrowing, they didn't borrow their money from the old savings and loans that aren't in business anymore. They're borrowing their money from the government through, government-sponsored entities like Freddie Mac or Ginnie Mae or somebody like that. The modern era, nobody knows. Nobody's been in an upward sloping, increase in interest rate environment. Mm-mm. And so what does that mean? So one thing that we're seeing is that if you've got a 3% mortgage, and you think that's normal when it's just not. I think I read that that the average rate over history of the 30-year mortgage is like 8%. Okay, so if you're sitting there with a 3% mortgage, you may be interested in buying a house, but if you've got to borrow any money, you don't want to give up your 3% mortgage and go to a 7% mortgage. You don't want to do it at all. Mm-mm. And if you're sitting there trying to get into a home, you're maybe somebody's telling you, oh, rates are going to go down. Just wait till rates go down. And let me back up for a second. If you're sitting there and you won't sell because you don't want to give up your 3% mortgage,
right.
Well, that's inventory that wouldn't otherwise be on the market. So you're limiting the supply. All other things being equal, if you limit the supply of something, price tends to be supported, go up or be supported anyway.
There's definitely a lot of pent-up demand in the housing market right now, I would think.
Well, I mean, most of the sources that I read would agree with that, support that idea. But you're dealing with a lot of people that were looking at a $600,000 house a couple of years ago. I think that's what we're going to buy. And now because of interest rates, they can only afford a $400,000 or a $375,000 house.
Right.
That's a humongous setback and I think that's a psychology issue. How long does it take for psychology to change? It's not overnight. You know what I mean?
No, you're right.
And so if you take those buyers, if you take them out of the market, well, that's all other things being equal. If there's fewer buyers, that's negative on price. So you've got these conflicting forces that one may be supporting prices, higher. Others that are maybe putting pressure would ordinarily put pressure on prices to go lower. And what you've seen is nothing's happening with prices.
Yeah, pretty flat.
Yeah. Sales, if you talk, and I talk to real estate professionals all the time. I doubt there's a week go by that I don't talk to 2 or 3. How's business? What's going on? Well, it's cooled off. It's a little bit going on. They said, prices hadn't really budged. Mm-mm. Haven't budged, but the transactions are off. So, the bottom line is it's a new period that nobody knows how it's going to play out. And I talk to people about that, and they say, I've never thought about that. If you're in a different interest rate cycle, and I say you are, what does that mean for real estate? Nobody in the modern era has experienced this, all right? And let's just say define modern era since 1990, 1992, I think, anyway.
Was that the last time the rates were?
No, it's not that. It's like, I think 92 is it 92 when Clinton came into office? Mm-hmm. And it was in his regime that he removed Glass-Steagall, which separated investment banks from commercial banks. And it was during that period of time which the mortgage-backed securities were really starting to get going, mm-hmm. where they're pooling your mortgages and selling them to investors. And that's really what I'm defining as the beginning of the modern era. Okay. Because that certainly helped lower mortgage rates, that mechanism. So, and get mortgages more widespread. So that's kind of how I'm defining, for my own purposes, the modern era. Because the whole lending market, and anything, credit being more widespread is helpful for home ownership, right? That's pretty obvious. And so that certainly was part of the reason why, the whole government-sponsored entities like Ginnie Mae and Freddie Mac came about. So that's kind of why I'm defining modern era, just so people know where I'm where I'm coming from. So nobody's experienced this higher interest rate environment, or an increasing interest rate environment is a better way to put it. So, and housing still is considered the most important sector to the economy because it has such the broadest ripple effect in the economy. So it's a big deal, and it's something that you should think about. Again, if you think rates are going back to 3%, I would say that's a naive position. Would it surprise me to see a mortgage rate with a 5 handle on it, meaning 5 something? No, it wouldn't surprise me at all. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And that's a big deal, I mean, from psychological, but some people would still say, oh, it's got to come lower. I mean, I think you're kidding yourself.
Yeah.
So anyway, just that's really my final point on the housing issue, but it's important.
It is indeed. So that's it?
Yep, that's it.
All right. Thank you.
Controversy.